Switzer, were they not gaffes?
Well, in Washington, a gaffe is known as when a politician inadvertently tells the truth. And I think in these cases, Romney more or less has told the truth. The problem, though, is that in diplomacy, you have to be very delicate with your language.
And of course, I guess it's highlighted even more because he could be the next president of the United States. So whatever he says, and just going back to the London one,
yes.
I mean, it was actually a relatively slight, apprehension, I guess, at whether London was ready, still a few days before the Games. And I mean, Prime Minister Cameron took a huge exception to it. In fact, what was his comment? He said, he bit back and said, well, of course it's easier if you hold an Olympic Games in the middle of nowhere, which was referencing Mitt Romney having organised the Salt Lake City Winter Games.
That's right. Look, I think I'd probably disagree with Tim to some extent. I don't think it was a good week for Romney, and I think the media had a field day at his expense, and this has hurt him this week. But ultimately, the economy will be front and centre of this election campaign. I think what this episode really shows, Helen, is that this politicians in America are increasingly playing less emphasis on foreign policy. And I think Americans themselves are less interested in foreign affairs today more than any time since the heyday of isolationism between the world wars. And this is a real problem. Romney doesn't have on his full-time staff a senior foreign policy advisor. Now, that is extraordinary.
Well, maybe that's what's showing.
Perhaps. The other thing to bear in mind...
But also, sorry, maybe what you're saying is he doesn't care because what you're saying could be true. Tim Lynch, do you agree with that proposition that perhaps American politicians don't care as much about the overseas perception of them?
Yes, I mean, I think Tommy's right that telling the truth abroad is really not going to make much difference. In fact, it may be a positive advantage to him. If you want a gaffe, Helen, the biggest gaffe so far of this campaign was President Obama saying that it wasn't entrepreneurs and business that had created their own success, but government. And Romney's ads are replaying this recurrently. When you put that against the gaffe of towards Palestinians, I think it's going to play hardly at all in the American heartland.
Yeah, Tim's absolutely right. I agree entirely. I think the biggest gaffe so far in the last few months of the campaign was Barack Obama saying that if you owned a business, you weren't responsible for that, somebody else is, meaning the government. And of course that will play and potentially hurt him at home. Well, you have to remember, ideologically speaking, 40% of the American people identify themselves as conservative, whereas only 20% identify themselves as liberal. So that kind of message will not play well with middle America. And Tim, how do you think all this is affecting both candidates at home with US voters? Where is your assessment of where they're both at?
Well, I think it's a dead heat, which is why we tend to concentrate on these errors of speech and make more of them than is probably warranted. I don't think until you get to the conventions that you're going to have this period of nervousness, this phony war, with no candidate taking a clear lead. So it's a rather cagey game both are playing. Both are trying to raise a lot of money in order to secure some sort of long-term advantage, but neither is succeeding in a way that they would hope. So in some ways, I think we're talking up a campaign which is still in its latent phase and dwelling on small issues before the big ones unfold in October and in the days before the November voting day.
We're going to get to the bigger issue, which is obviously the economy, in a moment. But just following on these sort of gaffes and these misspeakings, Tom, I mean, does it say anything about Mitt Romney's ability to read an audience and to have empathy with an audience? Because there was that other famous comment that he made about NASCAR racing, which is clearly, a favourite sport of many working-class Americans. And he said, well, I don't know too much about NASCAR racing or race car drivers, but I know the guys who own the teams. Yes. I mean, does that endear him to the heartland? Well,
look, no, but I think what's going to win him the election, to the extent that he can win it, is Obama's economy. That's really going to be his best chance of winning. I think in many respects you could argue that when there were books published about Bushisms, there'll be, the famous quotes or misquotes by President Bush the younger. You could probably have a book on Romneyisms, and all it would be gaffes. So it doesn't play well, but nevertheless, I think it's not going to hurt him. It's not going to hurt him, no. Not to the extent that I think the media class is making it out to be.
Yes, if I could just add, I think, in some ways, if Obama's strategy is to go after Romney because he's rich, there are certain limits to this strategy. Romney is a successful businessman, and in the current climate, being a successful businessman contending to be president plays much better than being a successful community organizer from Chicago. I think just Romney's got credentials that Obama will batter away at, but isn't necessarily going to prosper by so doing.
All right, well, as you're both saying, it is going to get back to the economy. With both candidates, they've been slamming each other on issues like their tax plans. President Obama slammed Romney's tax plan. Let's have a listen to what he had to say about this.
They have tried to sell us this trickle-down tax cut fairy dust before. And guess what? It didn't work then. It will not work now. It takes us backwards to a place we don't need to be. We do not need more tax cuts for folks who have done very, very well. We need more tax cuts for working Americans. We need tax cuts for families who are trying to raise your children.
And of course, Mitt Romney wasn't going to take that lying down. He hit back and equally slammed the president's economic record. Let's have a listen.
23 million Americans out of work or underemployed. 23 million. It's a tragedy. It's a moral failing for a country as successful and wealthy as ours to have had policies that kept people from going to work. I want to get people back to work that want to work. I understand what it takes to get America working again. I understand that it's small businesses that create jobs in America, that people create jobs, not government, and I'm going to get America working again.
Tom Switzer, with the economy, they're still so sluggish, unemployment still so high. On that score, shouldn't President Obama be on his way out?
Well, he will struggle. That's the point. I think the conventional wisdom suggesting that he will win is wrong because I think he is hurting. The problem that Obama has, whatever you think of Mitt Romney's message, the problem that he has is that his presidency has been the worst for the poor people of America and even middle-class families. All it's led to, in many respects, is more debt, but not much growth. We'll get the unemployment figures for the June month later tonight.
I mean, he was landed with the GFC after...
Well, that's true, but bear in mind, he did raise people's expectations, and his economic team justified that big spending stimulus package in April of 2009 on the grounds that it would lead to 6% unemployment by 2012. It hasn't done that, far from it.
All right. Tim Lynch, what's your view about this? The economy is obviously going to be the only issue in town.
Yes, and that often is the case. Of course, there's a supreme irony here that Obama, by most measures, has created more poor people than many of his predecessors, and yet his strategy to get re-elected is to play on the envy of these poor people towards those that haven't had their taxes cut sufficiently. I think he's going to get bitten at both ends if he pursues in this approach.
All right, we're going to take a very short break. We'll be back with our panel, having a special look at the US presidential race right after this.
From creating cutting-edge healthcare solutions that help doctors cure people, to financing and building Australia's businesses, to developing advanced technology which can help move and power Australia. That's the difference two letters can make.
Reject the cost of big brands. Get into the Reject Shop for famous brands at everyday low prices. You'll save enough for some extra treats and still keep your budget on the rails. The Reject Shop, the savvy way to shop.
When I retired from work, I thought, you beauty. Here's my chance to do the things I've always wanted but never had time. You know, my wife says it's never too late to teach an old dog new tricks.
Retirement can be an exciting stage in your life. It's a time to look forward to your future. But it's also a time when your lifestyle and financial needs are changing. And that's why thousands of Australians are making plans to take care of their funeral expenses in advance. With a seniors funeral plan from Australian Seniors Insurance Agency in place, your family will receive a cash benefit of up to $15,000 when you pass away, and if your death's accidental, that benefit amount automatically triples up to $45,000. Best of all, the benefit can be used however your family sees fit. And a seniors funeral plan is also easy and affordable. For example, a $5,000 benefit for a male aged 50 is just $5.68 per fortnight. Plus, you have the choice of single or family cover options, so you can cover your partner and dependent children. There's a simple over-the-phone application with no forms, embarrassing health questions or medicals required. Plus, your acceptance is guaranteed if you're aged 50 through 79.
Kathy's always put up with me, so the least I can do is try to make sure she isn't left with financial worries.
For the peace of mind of knowing your funeral expenses are covered in advance, call the Over 50s insurance specialist today on 1300 710 843 or visit seniorsfuneralplan.com.au.
In an exclusive, James Packer's plans for Perth and his blunt message for state premiers. And Paul Bloxham from Asia's Premier Bank, HSBC, joins us to talk about Australia's place in the China century. All on Australian Business, tonight on Sky News Business.
Welcome back to Lunchtime Agenda. My guests include Tom Switzer with the US Studies Centre at Sydney University, and in Melbourne, Dr Tim Lynch, Senior Lecturer in American Politics at Melbourne Uni. Tim Lynch, can I start with you first? I mean, in the polls, where do they sit? Because while you say they might be neck and neck and it's going to be a very close race, is President Obama still in front in those key battleground states?
Well, he is, as far as that matters in August, when many Americans are, those that aren't out of work, are on holiday. The thing hasn't really solidified yet. It is unusual, given the last few presidential races, to see such a tight race until you factor in the state of the economy and the perceived poor performance of the incumbent. Most incumbents get re-elected in American history. This one is facing a very problematic challenge, the closest analogue of which, is Jimmy Carter in 1980. So in some ways, I think this is illustrated by the closeness of the polling. And my prediction, for as much as it counts, is that this closeness is likely to carry on through right until the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November.
All right, but are you saying, Tim Lynch, that really because of the state of the economy, I didn't ask you before what I asked Tom, I mean, shouldn't Barack Obama be on the way out?
Yes, except we come back to the problem of the challenger, that it's difficult to pick a perfect candidate.
You mean?
No, there is no perfect candidate of either party, but certainly Romney is not it. He should be further ahead. I mean, he's not ahead. I mean, it's as close as a dead heat, but Romney is slightly edging it now. Given the economic circumstances in which the Republic finds itself, any challenger should be further ahead. I think that suggests that Romney does have a problem in terms of perception amongst his base, which he's still struggling to put right. So I still think it's too close to call. I know Tom has suggested it looks Obama's going to have a problem. I find it a very difficult one to call.
All right. So, Tom, I mean, at this stage, we're still in the American summer. This is the peak period when people do go off and have holidays. They're probably not engaged yet, are they?
No, I don't think they'll be engaged until the Republican and the Democratic primaries later this month and early next month. The real kicking start, I think, is the Labor Day holiday, which is the first weekend of September,
isn't it?
And that's when the game ball really starts. And we'll have a better sense of how the advertisements in these battleground states.
All right, so tell us a bit about these battleground states and where each of the candidates are. Florida's one of them, Ohio.
Yeah, well, bear in mind, the two battleground states to watch out for are the battleground states that really tipped the elections in 2000 and 2004. 2000, of course, many people remember Florida and those Chads. That's clearly still a battleground state. And in 2004, it all came down to Ohio. They will remain the two major states, but there are other states as well, Virginia, West Virginia, Colorado, Wisconsin, even Ohio, Iowa, I should say, where the first caucus of every year takes place. So it'll all come down there. And what's happened here in the last month is the Obama campaign has spent a lot of money in advertisements trying to set the scene for what a Romney presidency would be like, you know, looking after the wealthy at the expense of the middle class, won't pay his taxes, you know, a man who's like Mr. Monopoly Man without the cane and the coat and whatnot. And now, bear in mind, this will meet a response from the Romney team. They will go out half a leather, and they are raising more money than the Obama campaign, unlike in 2008 when the Democrats outspent the Republicans by 3 to 2. So bear that in mind. There'll be a lot of spending in the next 3 months, and it will come down to those battleground states.
Yeah. Tim Lynch, what's your view of which way the battleground states are leaning?
Well, in some ways, I've always felt that the battleground states tend to skew the debate, as if winning here gives you the presidency. The battleground states, the polling in it now and the eventual returns on election day will map the voting division across the nation. So the obsession with these, I think, is in some way misplaced, except clearly two men have a lot of ground to cover, and naturally, given the mathematics of this, concentrating in certainly key states, so between 7 and 8, 9 states, obviates the need to travel to ones which aren't as electorally consequential, even though the candidates need to carry those as well.
Yeah.
Ohio doesn't give you the president.
No, but
there are 49 other states, but Ohio is a very good proxy for the mood of the nation.
Yeah, Tim Lynch, though, the fact that Romney is winning the fundraising race at the moment, does that give an indication of where, you know, backers and people with money and even ordinary Americans who might just donate $20, $50 online, which way they're moving?
Well, I think it's difficult to make that, to predict how that will shift things. Of course, Romney's great strength is that he's been running for office now for, what, 5, 6 years for this particular office. He has a structure, he has an organisation on the ground and attendant funds which are increasing.
Yep.
That's met, of course, by Obama, who isn't a challenger this time, he's a sitting president. The advantage of incumbency are very marked across the American political system. One way to guarantee getting elected to Congress, for example, is to be elected to Congress. Some 90% of men and women that are elected once will be elected again. It's not quite as marked when it comes to the presidency, but the greatest asset you have is being a president if you want to be a president again.
Gentlemen, we will have to call it a day. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Tim Lynch, Melbourne Uni, and Tom Switzer from the US Study Centre. Appreciate your time and joining us. That's all for this edition of Lunchtime Agenda. Join the team for PM Agenda at 4:15 Eastern this afternoon. I'm Helen Daly. Thanks for your time and your company.